he had gotten to the point that I'm headed to someday, which was the stuff up top was pretty much gone. But he had not been willing to give up the battle. And he had brought in from foreign localities some of the hair and managed to get it around and come right across the front so that he still, when he looked in the mirror, could see hair on this side, hair on this side, and hair right here. I've seen a lot of people do that, but this particular fellow, it was very awkward, the extent to which he had to get it there. And you could tell that he had spent some time getting it there and then plastering it in place. But from behind, not only was pretty much this whole region bald, but what hair was there was in just terrible disarray. You would almost have to try to make it look as bad as it looked. And the amusing thing about it was how utterly bad he looked from this view in contrast to how careful he had been to get everything arranged for his view. Now, there's not anything wrong with that morally, it's just interesting, but it points out something about our nature as human beings. We tend to be either oblivious to the viewpoint of other people, or sometimes, even if we're not oblivious of it, we just don't care about the viewpoint of other people as long as our viewpoint is satisfied. And this gentleman, when he had looked in the mirror that morning, he had got his viewpoint satisfied, and that was all. I don't know if he ever thought about, what he looked like from behind. If you're ever in one of those stores where they have those three-way mirrors, you get reminded, the views that everybody else has to see that you don't see. But we just have a knack as human beings for seeing our viewpoint to the negligence of other people's viewpoint and at the expense of other people's viewpoint. I remember one time talking with a 13-year-old girl and her mother, and they were having some family problems. And the daughter was very resentful, and she clearly didn't think that her mother understood her. And I said, do you think that your mother, who was, in her 30s, do you think that your mother knows what it's like to be 13? Or maybe she goes 40, but, and without batting an eye, the 13-year-old says, no. Never dawned on her that, maybe before her mother got to 35 or 40, whatever she was, 40 maybe. I guess it would have had to have been 40. Didn't do my math well. Whatever the case, and I didn't ask the lady's age. But it didn't dawn on her, my mother's been 13 before. And it hadn't dawned on her, what would it be like to be my mother's age and try to take care of and be responsible for a 13-year-old. It's the attitude you see when you go to, say, the grocery store, and there's the express lane for 8 items or less, and you see the person rushing in there with 20 items. Well, that person may well know how they look to other people, and they just don't care. All of these things focus around starting with our viewpoint and either not caring or being oblivious about some others. We're about to have a baby. It'll be due at the beginning of August. I'm beginning to think it'll be coming before then. But right now, that baby's universe is the inside of Bertina's womb. That's the expanse of the universe right there. And pretty soon, that baby's going to be exposed to other people. And how is that baby going to view other people? Purely in regards to that baby's needs. And that's the way it's supposed to be for a newborn. A newborn is not supposed to be concerned about the various problems that the rest of us have to deal with and face. A newborn's responsibility will be to, when it's hungry, to cry, when it's wet, to cry, when it's tired, to cry. And that's going to be the extent of its responsibilities for at least a short amount of time. I hope that child will grow up to have a healthy view of self and a healthy view of others. And biblically, that comes down to, what did it say in Leviticus 19:17? The most often single verse of the Old Testament, referred to more often in the New Testament than any other verse from the Old Testament. Love your neighbor as yourself. It doesn't mean don't love yourself. It means love your neighbor as yourself. Want what's right for you and want what's right for the other. Recently, and I mentioned this Wednesday night briefly, but I want to mention it again here. Leanna and I were in a study Wednesday, and we were talking about the way that we can get blinders to certain things, and that we need each other to help, Hebrews says, provoke unto love and good works, and to exhort one another. And we can learn from one another and see some of the things that we miss. For the study that we're doing in Restoration history, I had been reading some little biographical information about various people who lived in the 1800s. And what struck me, in part, was that as you read about some of those people, you can read about great things that people recognize them at, and also you can read sometimes about just real character flaws that people could see in other people. Sometimes minor, sometimes more major something. There was this one preacher, and maybe it struck me a little bit because it described him, and he was my height, and I'm not used to seeing many people my height, so even in literature, I'm reading about this fellow from the 1800s, and I happen to mention he was 6'6". And I'm going on, and I'm reading, and they're talking about he did this well, and then it said, but even his friends all recognized, these flaws. And the flaws that I happen to mention, one was people felt that he was just a little bit too preoccupied with the animals on his farm. It was, he ran a school, and somebody else was writing to somebody else about the school, and they're saying, we're hoping that Mr. So-and-so will be done soon with his livestock, perhaps a word from you from abroad would encourage him to pay more attention to things here and such. Another thing that his friends said about him was that they said, his friends conceded he could be rather selfish. And it started making me think, what if after we were dead, somebody wrote some biographical notes about you and I? Now, it probably won't. Probably after I'm dead, I'm going to be dead, and my great-grandchildren won't know my name probably. But if somebody did write some notes about you or I, and there was a section about our strengths, and then there was a section about our flaws. You think on the section about our flaws, it would just say, he just didn't have any at all. She just had none. Nobody ever saw any shortcomings that she had or he had. Sometimes our friends and our family see our shortcomings more easily than we do. Sometimes we can pretend they're not there or try to be oblivious to them. And what we have an obligation to do, God put us here on this earth, and we are to grow. Now, there are some things we can't do a whole lot about. If you lost both your legs, somebody's going to say, well, he wasn't very fast and he couldn't walk, and there's not much you can do about that. But if there's some things we can do something about, we have a responsibility while we live here to be growing and be bettering ourselves, and to be learning to look at ourselves the way to use the golden rule. I want you to, in considering this, look with me at 2 Samuel chapter 12 and see how important this was in Nathan approaching David. David had sinned a grievous sin. It's hard to imagine how you would not see how evil this is. David, the king, with many wives, has sent the people out to war, and he has stayed here up on the king's house, and he looks out and he sees this woman bathing, Bathsheba. He inquires, who is that? They say, well, that's Uriah's wife. That's Bathsheba. And he says, go get her. and they bring her to him, and he has sexual relations with her. And this results in a pregnancy, which he tries to cover up, and when he can't cover it up one way, he has her husband killed. Has the military go forward to a hot spot in battle and then pull backwards so that he's killed, and a number of other men are killed as well. And David dismisses the whole thing by saying, well, tell the captain of the army not to worry about it. Those things happen in battle. In essence, is what he says. One of the most evil things recorded in the Bible, one of the most selfish things. What did Nathan do to help David see his problem? Nathan didn't come to David about what David did. Nathan removed it and made it external to David, aside from his justifications and excuses and prejudices and biases and everything else, and he put it over here. And we're going to read about that. And the reason that's important is because we have usually a better ability to see the faults of other people than the faults of ourselves. Sometimes we can see our own strengths and other people's weaknesses. And if you want to find a bunch of people that don't get along well, or if you want to see a family that doesn't get along well, you look for a family where people see where they're right and where everybody else is wrong, and never the reverse. Constant tension and trouble. So now the situation is removed from David, and we read in 2 Samuel 12, verse 1, Jehovah sent Nathan unto David, and he said unto him, and he came unto him and said to him, there were two men in one city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceeding many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing save one little ewe lamb, which he had brought up and nourished. And it grew up together with him as with his children, and it did eat of his own morsel, and drank of his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and was unto him as a daughter. Why are these details there? To help David see how this wasn't just, oh, there was a fellow had a sheep and somebody stole it. Well, go penalize him or something. He develops the story and puts the details in there where David can really appreciate how important this was to this man. And there came a traveler to the rich man, and he spared to take of his own flock and as of his own herd to dress for the warfaring man that was come unto him, but took the poor man's lamb and dressed it for the man that was come to him. And David's anger was greatly kindled against who? Against the man. David's not mad at himself yet. David's mad at the man that would do that. David's anger is kindled against. And he said to Nathan, as Jehovah liveth, the man that has done this is worthy to die. And in verse 7, Nathan said to David, you are the man. By making it external to David, he made David, without the excuses, without the justification, without the rationalization, without the I don't want to look at it, he made him just look at the facts of the selfishness and the evil and what he had done to Uriah. And it really only touched on part of the story. If the story would have been extended, he said, and then to cover it up, he went and killed the man. It could have gone farther. But this was enough to make the basic point. And David could see it there. There was an old Indian expression about walking a mile in another man's moccasins. And one of the most important things to do in life is to learn how to view things not from our own perspective, but externally. To understand how we appear to other people, to understand how our actions affect other people, to understand things from somebody's angle besides our own. This is important. It's important when using with other people. If you're in a conflict, whether it's in your home or somewhere else, stop and don't just look. What does Philippians 2 say? Not looking each of you to his own things, but also to the things of others. And that will include, many times, the importance of stopping and understanding their point of view. I've had times where I've been mad at Bertina, and she's mad at me, and she sees her point of view, and I see my point of view. And as long as I'm just looking at my point of view, my case looks pretty good. And boy, I see my point of view really well, and then after a few minutes, I start to look at it from her point of view, and my case kind of shrivels up and doesn't look so good. Selfishness causes us to just look at our point of view, and it creates, down here just outside of Thurmont at Camp David, right now we have Israeli and Palestinian leaders, and where we hear how they're struggling, and it's tense and everything else. Well, you've got one person looking from his point of view and another person looking from his point of view, and when people have different points of views and they're each trying to protect their own point of view, you're going to have constant struggle and that type of thing. This is important when dealing with other people. It's important for us to do, and you can also see sometimes when you're trying to help someone else, maybe it's someone that's upset with you and they're not understanding your point of view. Ask them, put them external to the situation. Ask them to consider, what if the situation here was reversed? What if it was the opposite that it is? What if you were in my situation? Put yourself in theirs, put theirs in yours. It's important to remember when we're teaching people. One of the things that happens when people teach at a very immature level is that they will go in and they will get either a lesson or a series of points or a correspondence course or a card or whatever, and this is what they'll say to everybody that they try to study with. And it may be something everybody needs to hear, but it's not the point at which everybody's at yet. One person believes in God, knows what they ought to do, and knows they're not doing it. Another person believes in God, but they don't know what they're supposed to do. Another person doesn't believe in God. We talked about last week when we looked at Paul in Athens, the difference between his sermon to Gentiles in Acts 17 and his sermon to Jews in the synagogue. Why did he preach different sermons? Because he's thinking about his audience and what his audience needs, considering their point of view. Considering somebody else's point of view doesn't mean that you're justifying them. It doesn't mean that you're saying they're right. It means that you stop and think about, if I was in that situation, what would I be seeing? What would I need? If you're trying to study with someone, look where they're at. Think about, if I was there, what would I need somebody to do? I'd need somebody to show me this out of the Bible. I would need some, and then show them that. Go through that mental process. There's 3 steps in this I want to describe. When we're faced with a conflict or misunderstanding, the first step is to only see our own interests. And let's illustrate it with a little child. Here's one family's visiting another family. There's 2 children, and there's one toy of interest between the 2 that maybe a few minutes ago wasn't a toy of interest, but now it has become the subject of considerable interest. Step number 1 is the child, I want the toy. And what's being considered here? Nothing except the fact, I want the toy. A second step is where you examine yourself, at least. And the child says, I've got a right to that toy because it's my toy. This other child, it's not this child's toy, it's my toy. And this is a step beyond just pure desire. I want the toy. This is looking from my point of view and saying, do I have a reason here? Do I have justification for my behavior? Yes, it's my toy. It belongs to me. I didn't say that I could have it, so I have the right to demand it. Step number 3 stops looking just at self and does what? It looks at things from the viewpoint of somebody else. This is total selfishness here, when I'm only thinking about my wants and needs and not at all examining my behavior to see if there's any justification for me. But to stop here comes far short of what I need to do, because step 3 involves, if I was visiting somebody else's house and didn't have my toys, and so if I'm going to play with anything, I'm going to have to play with one of their toys, and I see a toy that I like, would I want them to share with me, or would I want them to snatch it away from me whenever it comes up? Well, now that kind of changes it, doesn't it? And if I'd stopped back here, it's my toy. Just looking at my justification, I haven't seen what I need to see about somebody else's viewpoint. Now let's bring it to more of an adult type thing. Let's say here's a husband and wife. And the husband starts off on a purely selfish level. I want that new set of golf clubs. You know, I've been looking at it in the catalog, and boy, if I had those new set of golf clubs, you know, everybody else out there on the course would be envious of me, and boy, I could improve my game, and I want those golf clubs. Okay, pure need. Now he examines, well, do I have a right to have those golf clubs? And he starts thinking, well, it's my money. I earned it. You know, I'm taking care of my family. There's a roof over their head. You know, they've got some food on the table. And I work hard, and I've got a right to have those golf clubs. You know, man, it's important to relax and to have recreation and things like that. And there's nothing wrong with me getting those golf clubs. Step 3, suppose his wife, you know, the vacuum cleaner that you bought her, you know, 20 years ago, you know, it's just, you know, the dirt comes in here and it goes out there, and it's just, and she's been asking and asking for a new vacuum cleaner. And then you've mentioned to her about these new golf clubs you want to buy, and you saw the disapproval on the face, and you heard the reminder about the vacuum cleaner and everything, and then stop and think, you know, what if I was in my wife's shoes? What if I was sacrificing my time and energy to provide for the family, to have warm meals on the table, to be raising the kids, be taking care of these things, and I was married to somebody that was now going to spend all this money on new golf clubs so they could play better instead of on something where I could work better. Now that kind of starts to change the picture a lot, doesn't it? It's looking not just at our things, but the things of others. One mother drops her child off at another mother's house, and there's a bunch of kids there, and they're doing some activities or whatever, and this mother goes away. And while she's gone, her child is misbehaving. Maybe he's doing something dangerous towards the other children, or maybe he's not following the rules or misbehaving in some way. And so the mother that's left in charge has to say, I'm sorry, you know, you're going to have to sit out on this or whatever, and the child is restricted from something because of the child's misbehavior. Well, this mother comes back, and at the first level, there's just her selfish desire of what? I want my child to be happy and be accepted. And so she's upset. Well, but then she stops and she examines. Well, do I have a right to feel this way? Well, can she line up some reasons? I'm the mother. If that child needs to be disciplined and corrected, that's my responsibility to do that. I'm the mother of that child, and I should be doing that. Well, she's got some things she lined up if she's just looking from her point of view. But there's a third step she needs to do, right? What if I had been left in charge of not only my children, but some other people's children too? And one of those children was not behaving or doing something dangerous or not following the rules or something. Would I need to be able to make some rules and corrections about that? Oh, yes, I would. And this is what people so often don't do. People act selfishly. They're either oblivious to anybody else's concerns, or they don't care about other people's concerns, and it's utterly unbiblical. This is what the Bible talks about our relationship with each other. Look at Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. All things, therefore, whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them. This is the law and the prophets. You go back and you look at so many of the things in the law, the Old Testament law and the prophets, and you know what it comes down to? Do to other people like you would want them to do to you. You remember when we studied the minor prophets recently? You remember how much of the time the prophets were scolding the people for how they were abusing the poor and mistreating them. Do to others like you would want them to do to you. Remember how often they rebuked the businessmen for doing what? Having dishonest weights? Do to other people what you would want to do to you. Paul says over in Romans chapter 13, owe no man anything, verse 8, save to love one another, for he that loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. For this, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. If there's be any other commandment, it's summed up in this word, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Problems arise in marriages, problems arise between children and parents, problems arise in the workplace, problems arise in churches, problems arise in communities, problems arise between neighbors because people don't do this. It's fundamental to the gospel message. Now, I've seen people very interested in religious matters that were still just selfish people. And I don't care how much we know about the Bible. I don't care if we know how much we know about the various doctrines of different groups. I don't care what we've accomplished. If we're selfish, we've missed the essence of what Jesus is teaching us. Luke 9:23, what did he say? If any man would come after me, let him deny self. Greatest commandment. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. Look at Matthew chapter 18. Here's the story given to illustrate the importance of forgiving people. Peter's asked, how many times did my brother sin against me and I forgive him? 7 times? He says, no, 70 times 7. And he gives his parable, verse 23. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king who would make a reckoning with his servants. When he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him that owed him 10,000 talents. For as much as he had not wherewith to pay, the Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and his children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. Well, the servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Well, he wouldn't have been able to pay all to begin with, because the amount here we're talking about, it's hard to calculate currency from back then to now, but it's certainly in excess of $10 million, this 10,000 talents. And there's just no way, if you've got a servant that owes you $10 million, and he says, I'm going to pay it all back, it's not going to happen. There's a reason why the figure's put so high here, and we'll comment on that in just a second. But he says, please be patient with me and I'll pay thee all. And look at verse 27. The Lord of that servant, being moved with compassion, released him and forgave him the debt. Well, that's wonderful. Now, how would you like it if tomorrow the bank called you and said, you know what, we were just looking over the records and everything, we've had a good year, and we don't always have to make money. I had a used car dealer tell me that, salesman, tell me that one time. He said, I'm not like these other guys. I don't have to make money. I just want to make you happy. And they sit there and they say, we've been looking at this and things are going just real well. And we thought, why don't we just cancel your mortgage and you're just paid off. That'd be a nice phone call, wouldn't it? If you're paying a mortgage, you'd be glad to hear that if you're still paying a mortgage. Well, here's this fellow, and his entire debt that he has no hope of paying, he just says, you're forgiven. Well, how would you feel? I'd feel good. That servant went out, and of course this is just a story Jesus is telling, but it's very real when we stop and compare it to our own lives. That servant went out and found one of his fellow servants that owed him 100 shillings. A shilling, my footnote says, about 17 cents, so 100 shillings is about $17. So you've just been forgiven $10 million of debt, and now you finally go to the guy that owes you $17. And he laid hold on him, took him by the throat, and said, pay what you owe. The fellow servant did what he did a few minutes earlier, fell down, besought him, saying, have patience with me and I will pay thee. And he wouldn't. and he cast him into prison till he should pay that which was due. When his fellow servants saw what was done, they were exceeding sorry, and came and told their lord all that was done. His lord called him unto him, and said, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you besought me. Should you not also have had mercy on your fellow servant, even as I had mercy on you? Is there anybody in here who has trouble seeing the wickedness in that servant? Is anybody in here who says, yeah, $17 is $17. I can see that. He wasn't obligated to forgive this other fellow just because the other guy had been foolish enough to forgive him. And we can all see the wickedness there, right? Not for 1 second do we have any trouble seeing the problem with that fellow's attitude, do we? Right? When we sinned against God, we sinned against somebody who never sinned against us. When we sin against each other, it's just kind of a continual thing that we've done to other people. Most of the time that you've accepted an apology from somebody, it's for something that you've had to apologize for somebody else for before, maybe even the same person. So it's really not a very big deal, is it? If forgiveness, if you picture it as a toll on a bridge, sometimes you're going this way, sometimes you're going that way, and it's just, we all need that to be there to get back and forth in human relationships. We need apologies. If everybody you had ever wronged in any way was still mad at you about what you did, you'd have to hide in a hole in the ground. We need forgiveness. God doesn't. God doesn't need forgiveness. And so when we sin against God, our Creator, that's like the $10 million debt. When we've sinned against each other relative to our sin against God, that's like the $17 debt. It's not that it's not serious, it's just when, if you do something to somebody and then ask them to forgive you and they forgive you, and then tomorrow they've done it to you, and it's no great deed that you forgave each other. It's to be expected. You both need it. But forgiveness could be taken out of the universe and God would still be okay. We wouldn't. God would. Much greater that we've sinned against God. Now, when you've sinned against God and you ask God to forgive you, do you expect Him to do that? Yeah. When we fall on our knees before God and we say, Father, I'm sorry I did that, please forgive me, what do we expect Him to do? What's it say in Hebrews? We'll remember no more. Now, have you or I ever, on the same day that we've prayed, and maybe it's over breakfast or lunch or supper or just in our room or going down the road or other time prayer, said, Father, forgive me my sins. And we just expect Him to do that. And then a little bit later, somebody does something wrong to us and they say they're sorry, and we say, I'm not ready to hear that. I don't believe it. I'll wait and see. I'll watch and see if you're really sorry. We ever done that? I've had that attitude before. How is that different from the fellow here in Matthew 18? When it's here in Matthew 18 and it's external to us, we can see how ugly and foolish and selfish it is for this fellow to want a great forgiveness for himself and deny forgiveness to somebody else asking. We can see that. But in our own lives, we can sometimes see, well now, yeah, I want God to forgive me, but we have an uncanny ability to look at things from a very selfish point of view. And where I want to end the sermon is just reminding us of how important it is not just to look at things from our point of view, but to look at it externally, to view ourselves as others view us, and to view ourselves as God views us. This fellow here, when we read about him, we see how he looks to us. How does he look to God? Verse 34, so his Lord was wroth, delivered him to the tormentors till he should pay all that was due. So shall also my heavenly Father do to you, if you forgive not everyone his brother from your hearts. We'll close with Philippians chapter 2. It's a beautiful passage in the second chapter. It says in verse 1, if there is therefore any exhortation in Christ, if any consolation of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any tender mercies and compassions, make full my joy that you be of the same mind, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Now look at verse 3. If you've got tension in your marriage, focus on this verse. If you've got problems in other areas, in interpersonal relationships, focus on this verse. Doing nothing through faction or through vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, each counting other better than himself. Not looking each of you to his own things, but each of you also to the things of others. Have this mind in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who existing in the form of God, counted not the being on equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in likeness of man, being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, becoming obedient even unto death. If Jesus would have stopped with step 1, he could have just said, I don't want to go down there and live on that earth and get treated like that and die. Or he could have said step 2, well, I wish this sin problem wasn't here, but I'm not the one that committed the sin. They sinned against me, not vice versa. But what did he do? He humbled himself. He humbled himself, not looking to his own things, but to the things of others. And that's what the secret of life is about. Learning to look beyond ourselves, our point of view, our interests, seeing how we look before other people, and looking at other people as equally valid creations of God. Doesn't mean justifying their behaviors, but it means getting beyond that self point of view that is the root of so much sin, tension, conflict, ugliness, and the exaltation of self, which Jesus said, he that exalts himself is going to be humbled. Let's humble ourselves so we can be exalted. Thank you for your attention. If you're subject to the invitation in any way, won't you come as we stand and sing?